Hello and welcome to Lesson 4, Baillargeon's Explanation of Early Infant Abilities. So we have looked so far at Piaget and his theory of cognitive development. We then moved on to Vygotsky, and now we're looking at Baillargeon's explanation of early infant ability. So the paradigm that was developed by Baillargeon is revolutionary. Remember, Piaget says infants develop object permanence and more advanced cognitive abilities at set stages. The first stage, these abilities start to emerge at about 9 months, and then by about 2 they move on to the next stage. Well, Baillargeon investigates the abilities of newborns, and she believes that research by Piaget drastically underestimates the cognitive abilities of very young infants. So she argues that infants have object permanence, but the reason why they don't behave in the same way as older children is because they don't have the motor skills to actually go searching for objects that have suddenly disappeared. She used methods such as habituation and violation of expectation to investigate infant abilities, and really pioneered a whole area of cognitive research. So what is habituation and the approach? Well, habituation is when a baby is shown a stimulus and the point at which the baby looks away is the point we say that it has become habituated. Remember, habituation means habit. So they are comfortable with this object being there. It's no longer novel, unique, new. They're comfortable with it just being there. It's not interesting anymore. A violation of expectation refers to an expectation you have of an event that then is violated. So we'll look at a number of different activities that Baillargeon developed to actually measure this. And then look time. The dependent variable in most of these studies is the amount of time the infant spends looking at the scene, the stimulus, whatever it may be. And then the final definition that you probably want to know before we start is nativism. Now, nativism is the idea that we are born with some innate abilities. You're not born with everything, but you have some innate abilities which then act as a sort of bedrock upon which more complex abilities can be developed. So, violation of expectation. This is a classic example of the type of experiment that Baillargeon carried out. A violation of expectation in this study is you have 2 carrots. So in condition 1, a carrot this big, a small carrot, travels along a track and disappears behind an object. We call this occlusion, when one object is hiding. So I've got a book here, interestingly, studies in cognitive development. My face is being occluded by the book. Genius, right? So in this case, the carrot will be occluded because it's going behind the object. The taller carrot, however, will be occluded initially, but the expectation we would have is that we would see the carrot as it travels through the middle, disappear again, and then come out the other side. So we investigate whether babies respond in the same way. A large carrot and a small carrot travel behind the screen. The large carrot should be visible. Now, children as young as 3 months spend more time looking at the impossible event compared to the possible. The impossible event is when the carrot disappears behind the screen, but then does not appear in the hole in the middle. Infants as young as 3 months spend more time looking at that than in the standard scene. Now that's interesting because Baillargeon argues that actually that's evidence of object permanence. The fact that they're surprised in this condition means that they were expecting something else. If they were expecting it, it means that they had a rule which explains occlusion, the concept of occlusion to them. The next step then for for Baillargeon is this idea that these simple rules can be used as foundations, bedrocks, to build up more complex rules about the physical properties of the world. So she notes the development from a simple rule to a more complex rule over the matter of a month. So a 2.5-month-old infant uses a simple rule. It's an all or nothing rule, and you'll come across that term in your wider reading. So the all or nothing rule says if there is any object that the carrot is going to go behind, it should disappear. But the baby, as young as 2.5 months, expects to see it reappear. So baby shows surprise when it doesn't. However, when we add a third pillar to it so that it becomes a continuous object, specifically continuous with the floor, the babies do not show surprise when they don't see the carrot here. So in this condition at 2.5 months, they show surprise when the carrot is not there. Here, they do not show surprise when the carrot is not there. And the reason why is because this is treated as an occlusion object, as an all or nothing. If there is an occlusion object, you shouldn't be able to see the carrot. They don't understand that the carrot should be partially visible at this early stage. At 3 months, they're surprised under this condition. The baby shows surprise under this condition, so they've learnt that they should see the carrot because they should see the bottom of the carrot or the small carrot. However, babies still don't show surprise at this condition. The reason why is because the bar is actually at the bottom, and this is generating for the baby the concept of a continuous occlusion from the ground up, whereas this one is clearly not connected at the bottom, so it's not treated as the same occluding object. And then finally at 3.5 months, baby shows surprise at all of it. They show surprise here, here and here. So they've taken what was a simple rule, any occluding object it should disappear behind, and turned it into it should be visible here, it should be visible here, and it should be visible here. So this shows how simple rules can develop into complex ones. Another example is the unveiling task. So the unveiling task is you take a napkin or you take a tea towel and you cover an object, or in this case you put a protuberance underneath it so it looks like there's an object. Now 9.5 month old show surprise if you remove the tea towel or napkin or whatever it is and there's nothing there. They expect, because there's a protuberance, that there is an object causing that. However, they do not show surprise if you pull the napkin off and instead the big cup that you think would be under there as an adult, there's just a little marble. They're fine with that because it's an object. That's what they expected to see. So that's 9.5 month olds. However, by 12.5 months, children show surprise when the object is much smaller than expected. So this shows again how a simple rule develops into a more complex rule of simple rule. If there's a protuberance, then that usually means there's an object under there, to the more complex rule that a protuberance should have a relationship to the size of the object it is, masking or hiding. Really interesting stuff. Alright, explaining an infant's knowledge, the physical world and innate rules. So Baillergeon says this suggests the following developmental sequence. Infants form concepts that a protuberance indicates an object. They later identify a variable that affects this concept, in this case size, and this demonstrates, according to Baillargeon, an innate structure for gathering knowledge, and experience builds upon it. She also argues that the structure leads to psychological concepts, ultimately ideas like fairness and false beliefs. If you think about it, the idea of expecting something underneath a cloth and then not seeing it is kind of linked to the idea of fairness, isn't it, I think? False beliefs. So in a slightly different experiment, Baillergeon and Song used the violation of expectation to test false beliefs of the very young. Now this is one of my favourite studies they do. So they have an adult who plays with two toys but shows preference for the doll with the blue hair. The toys are then placed in a box in front of the infant. The blue doll, blue haired doll is placed in a plain box like this one, but the skunk is placed in a box with a bit of blue hair hanging off the lid, so as to give the impression, as you can see here, that the blue doll is actually in this box. Now the infant sees all this. So what does the infant do when it's watching the adult trying to find its favourite toy? Now, 14.5-month-olds show more surprise if the adult goes straight for the box the plain box that has the blue-haired doll in. The baby then, according to Baillargeon, knows first of all that the adult has a preference for the blue-haired one, knows that where the object has been, but is surprised when the adult goes straight there, because the blue hair from the box, according to the Baillargeon, indicates to the infant that the adult should expect to find the doll in there. In other words, the baby is developing an idea about the infant is developing an idea about the other person, the adult's false beliefs, that they falsely believe it's in there and why. Now, this is early stage stuff, but this is leading to a theory of mind. The idea that you can imagine what someone else has seen and what you expect them to do. So really I like this study a lot. Carefully controlled research. Let's get into some evaluation there. So we've talked about false beliefs. We've talked about violation of expectations. One of the strengths of a lot of this research is actually that it's highly controlled. So the researchers in one study used announcements in local papers to gather their participants. Now that's much stronger than what Piaget did. Piaget just used infants of academics. And infants of academics may not be typical for a number of reasons. And so they may have behaved completely different in his studies. Another factor to control is the potential effect of the parent on the infant's behaviour. So parents were asked to keep their eyes shut and not interact with their infants. Now that's important as well. Remember when we talked about the 3 mountains task for Piaget, communication from the adult to the infant is inevitable and unavoidable. However, that can influence the behaviour of the infant. She used a double-blind design. 2 observers recorded the infant's level of interest, but neither knew whether the event was possible or impossible. So they didn't know. They were just watching the baby's response. And this gives us objectivity and will reduce the chance that the observers will suffer from some kind of bias or other effect. Internal validity then. So it's strong. It's a strong sort of observational study. However, it could be argued that response to violation of expectation is not evidence of object permanence and things like that. Infants may look at a scene for a variety of reasons, and one version of the scene may just be more interesting. If you think about the big carrot, little carrot scenario, maybe infants just prefer big carrots, maybe. Schlesinger and Casey found that the infant's gaze was different for possible and impossible tasks. However, on impossible tasks, interest was better explained due to the greater perceptual interest. So here we could be completely barking up the wrong tree, have zero internal validity because we think we're looking at evidence of object permanence and understanding and knowledge, when we could just be looking at novelty or some other physical feature of the study. Alternative explanations for infants' knowledge of the physical world. Baillergeon suggests that infants are born with innate abilities to acquire certain types of knowledge. However, Spelk argues infants are born with knowledge of objects, and they call this core knowledge, which includes basic understanding of the physical world and certain principles like solidity of objects. Each object occupies space. Objects cannot pass through each other. Continuity of motion. Objects move in paths through space. An object can only get from A to B, so it can't jump to B without getting there, by moving on a continuous path. Now, these are innate basics that gear us up to learn pretty much anything. So, we've looked at a huge amount today. Baillargeon, read around the subject. I'll send you a link to a lecture that she gives. It's an hour and 40 minutes. It's long, but it's well worth your time. This is one of those few theories and studies that I think you are going to have to go beyond the material. I know I've provided a lot for you, but I feel like you're going to have to read around the subject here. If you do have any questions, bring them, send them, and we can discuss those. Otherwise, thank you very much for your time, and I will see you around. Bye.